I never imagined that a single cold chicken wing could make my younger brother stand at attention in front of our entire family on Thanksgiving night. The soft clink of a silver spoon against a porcelain plate echoed through the room. It was barely a sound, but even now, I can still hear it as clearly as if it happened yesterday. It was Thanksgiving at my mother's house in Arlington, Virginia. The long oak dining table was packed with 15 relatives. The smell of roasted turkey, rich gravy, warm apple pie, and cinnamon filled the house with the kind of comfort every family hopes to feel on Thanksgiving. Outside the windows, the last maple leaves of autumn drifted across the lawn beneath the porch light. If someone had walked past the house that night, they would have thought we were the picture of a perfect family. My mother smiled. She placed the biggest slice of turkey breast onto Nathan's plate, then another scoop of mashed potatoes, extra gravy, a warm buttered roll. She gently patted his shoulder. "Eat up. You need your strength." One of my aunts laughed. "Nathan's always been too skinny." The whole table laughed with her. Then my plate came around. My mother stopped it before it reached me. She glanced over the serving tray, then picked up the lone chicken wing sitting in the corner. The skin had gone dry. The meat clung stubbornly to the bone. She added a spoonful of cold green beans. Clink! The spoon tapped my plate. "That should be enough," she smiled. "You don't need nearly as much energy as Nathan does." My uncle shrugged. "She's right. At least Nathan actually works out in the field." One of my aunts lifted her wine glass. "The boys earned it." Laughter filled the room again. No one yelled at me. No one insulted me. Somehow, that made it hurt even more. Because in that room, not a single person thought anything unusual had just happened. I looked down at the lonely chicken wing. The truth was, I hadn't had time to sit down and finish a real meal in 3 days. I'd been living on coffee, protein bars, and half-eaten sandwiches between meetings. But nobody at that table knew that. To them, I was just the daughter with a desk job. Nathan was the family's pride. A Navy SEAL. His dress uniform was perfectly pressed. The gold buttons caught the glow of the chandelier every time he moved. Me? I was wearing the same plain gray business suit I always wore. No rank, no insignia. Nothing that hinted I served in the military too. I preferred it that way. I picked up my knife, set my fork down, exactly where my hands had learned to place them after nearly 20 years. I didn't think about it. I wasn't trying to make a statement. It was simply muscle memory. Then I slid my chair a few inches closer to the wall, just enough. I positioned myself so I could see the front door, the kitchen entrance, the sliding glass door to the backyard, and even the reflection in the mirror behind the liquor cabinet. It all happened in just a few seconds. So quickly, I didn't even realize I was doing it, but someone else did. Nathan, he was halfway through telling a story about his team, then the whole unit had to. He stopped mid-sentence. His fork froze in his hand, but it never reached his mouth. His eyes settled on my hands. I kept quietly pulling tiny strips of meat from the chicken wing. Without looking up, one of our cousins frowned. "So, what happened next?" Nathan didn't answer. He kept staring. A few seconds later, his eyes shifted to where I was sitting. Then to the doorway behind me. Back to my hands. The fork slowly lowered onto his plate. The smile disappeared from his face. One of my aunts lightly touched his shoulder. "Nathan?" He didn't hear her. By then, all of his attention was fixed on me. Right then, my mother looked over. "You're still wearing those gray suits?" She shook her head. "You always look like you work for the IRS. One of my aunts laughed, "Or the DMV. The table burst into laughter again. My mother took a sip of wine. "You could at least make an effort. You're pushing 40. No husband, no kids. Just buried in paperwork all day." I didn't respond. I simply kept cutting away at the tiny pieces of meat. Nathan still hadn't moved. One of my cousins started talking about last night's football game. Nathan never heard a word. My uncle asked him about his latest training cycle. Still no answer. His eyes moved from my hands, to my chair, to every doorway in the room, then back to my hands once again. I knew exactly what had just happened. He'd noticed something. Something that didn't belong. But he still couldn't quite believe it. My mother set down her wine glass and shrugged. "At least your brother is actually serving his country. As for you, you just push paperwork." No one objected. No one came to my defense. The air conditioner hummed softly overhead. My knife lightly scraped across the plate. Then suddenly, Nathan set his fork down with a sharp clang. The metallic sound made several people turn their heads. He looked straight at me. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "How?" He stopped, as if he was testing his own conclusion before saying it out loud. Then he asked, "How come you hold a knife like that?" I finally looked up. Our eyes met across the table. I didn't answer. I simply gave him the faintest smile. If you're still with me, leave a "bwah" in the comments. I'd love to know how many of you are staying for the rest of this story. Because Nathan's question didn't just change that Thanksgiving dinner. It opened the door to a secret I'd kept hidden for nearly 20 years. I looked at Nathan. He was still waiting for an answer. "Why do you hold a knife like that?" I just smiled and said nothing. Because if you really want to understand why one tiny, almost unconscious movement could make a Navy SEAL completely lose his composure, you have to go back nearly 30 years, to the day my father came home for the last time. Inside a casket draped with the American flag. It was drizzling over Arlington that morning, not hard enough to send people running, just enough to darken the grass across Arlington National Cemetery. I was 12 years old. The black dress my mother had bought hung loosely on my small frame. My hands were freezing. Nathan stood beside me. He was only 9. He held tightly to the brown teddy bear Dad had given him during his last leave. Every few seconds, he stretched onto his tiptoes to look toward the casket. "Sarah, when's Dad going to wake up?" I looked down at him. I didn't know what to say, so I just squeezed his hand. Together, we watched the soldiers slowly carry the casket forward. Then tap began to play. It was so heartbreakingly beautiful that nearly 30 years later, I can still remember every single note. Then came the rifle salute. One volley after another. Short, precise. The cemetery was so quiet, I could hear the spent brass hitting the stone. An older officer stepped in front of my mother. He lowered himself onto one knee, carefully holding the perfectly folded American flag in both hands. "On behalf of a grateful nation," he said quietly, "please accept this flag as a symbol of your husband's faithful and honorable service." My mother accepted it. She didn't cry, she didn't hug it, she didn't press her lips against the folded fabric the way I'd seen other military wives do that day. She simply looked at it for a few seconds, then gave a small nod. Her face was almost completely expressionless. At the time, I told myself she was just trying to stay strong. I was wrong. About 40 minutes later, we were driving home. The car stopped at a red light. Without warning, my mother slammed both hands against the steering wheel. "Your father was an idiot." I turned toward her. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. If he'd just left the military, if he'd listened to me and gone into real estate, he'd still be alive. She let out a cold, bitter laugh. "A flag. A few medals. Are they going to pay this mortgage? Are they going to raise 2 children?" No one answered. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers sweeping across the glass. Nathan hugged his teddy bear even tighter. He stared out the window for a long moment, then looked back at our mother. His voice was barely a whisper. "So, Dad's not coming home anymore?" My mother kept her eyes fixed on the road. She never answered. The car pulled away as the light turned green. Nathan never asked again. That night, after the last visitor had gone home, I walked past the small cabinet in the hallway. The door was still slightly open. My father's folded flag had already been tucked behind a stack of winter coats, next to a broken umbrella. I stood there for a long time. Then I carefully took it out. The folds had come loose. One corner was dusted with dirt. I carried it into my room, set a white towel over the ironing board, and slowly pressed each crease back into place. My hands were shaking so badly. The iron nearly slipped off the edge. I tried folding the flag. Wrong. I unfolded it. Tried again. Still wrong. I spread it open one more time. Took a slow breath. Then forced myself to remember every movement the honor guard had made at Arlington. It wasn't until the 4th try that I finally folded it into something that looked almost right. I held it against my chest for a long time. That night, I slid it beneath my bed. For nearly 2 years afterward, I slept directly of that flag every single night. Not because I thought it would bring me closer to my father, but because I was afraid that if I left it out, one day it would disappear too, just like he had. Nathan was different. He was still young enough to heal. A few months later, he started laughing again, playing baseball with his friends, going back to school. Children have a way of finding life again. I never blamed him for that. As for me, every time I looked into a mirror, I saw more of my father's face staring back. Maybe my mother saw it too, because after the funeral, she looked me in the eyes less and less. 3 months later, on a cold afternoon near the end of fall, an old Ford pickup pulled into our driveway. Doc Harmon climbed out. Mud clung to his worn leather boots. His weathered jacket was dark with rain. He knocked on the front door. My mother answered. She never invited him inside. Doc didn't seem to mind. Instead, he looked straight at me, then knelt until we were eye to eye. From an old canvas satchel, he pulled out a worn leather notebook with frayed corners. "Your father asked me to keep this for you. He said there'd be a right time to pass it on." I opened the first page. Carefully taped inside was a printed copy of a speech by Theodore Roosevelt. Beneath it, I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. "Don't live for applause. Live in a way that's worthy of the mission you've been given." Doc rested a hand gently on my shoulder. "Your father used to say, if anyone had the courage to keep walking the path he started, it would be you." From that day on, Doc came by almost every weekend. He never tried to replace my father. He simply showed up, quietly, consistently. Some Saturdays, he'd teach me how to shine a pair of leather dress shoes, patiently showing me how to move the cloth in small circles until I could see my own reflection in the toe. Other weekends, he'd bring an old American flag. Slowly, he'd walk me through every fold. If I got it wrong, he never scolded me. He'd simply unfold it, smile, and say, "That's okay. Let's do it again." That winter, after we finished folding the flag, we sat on the front porch drinking hot chocolate. Neither of us talked much. We just listened to the wind moving through the trees. For the first time since my father died, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world by myself. That night, I placed my father's journal beside the folded flag beneath my bed. Then I lay there, staring at the ceiling. I had no idea what my future would look like, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. One day, I was going to wear the same uniform my father had worn, no matter who tried to stop me. What I never expected was that the very first person to stand in my way would be my own mother. And the day my acceptance letter from West Point arrived, everything in our family changed forever. The day my acceptance letter from West Point arrived, I thought it would be the happiest day of my life. I read my name 3 times. Then I ran out onto the front porch, opened the envelope again, read it one more time. I was afraid I'd imagined it. After years of waking up before sunrise to run, after hundreds of hours studying, after weekends spent in the library while everyone else was at football games, I'd finally done it. I hugged the letter against my chest and ran into the kitchen. "Mom!" I got into West Point. She was pouring herself a cup of coffee. She didn't even turn around. She simply held out her hand for the envelope, read it in silence, folded the letter in half. "You still have time to turn it down." At first, I thought she was joking. "I don't want to turn it down." "I do." Her voice was calm, cold enough to stop the room. "I already lost my husband to a uniform. I'm not losing my daughter, too." I looked her in the eyes. "This time, I'm not listening to you." The kitchen went completely still. She stared at me for several long seconds. Then, without a word, she walked to the trash can and dropped the letter inside. The white envelope landed in a pile of wet coffee grounds. I couldn't move. Nathan was standing in the hallway. He saw everything. Our eyes met. He started to step toward me, but all it took was one look from our mother. He froze. Looking back, the part I remember most isn't seeing my acceptance letter in the trash. It's the look on my little brother's face, knowing he wanted to stand beside me but was still too young to know how. I bent down, picked up the letter. One corner was stained brown with coffee. I carefully wiped it clean with a paper towel, smoothed every wrinkle with my fingertips, then slid it into my backpack, without saying another word. That night, at exactly 3 in the morning, I picked up my old duffel bag and quietly walked toward the back door. Inside were only a few changes of clothes, a pair of running shoes, my father's folded flag, the journal Doc Harmon had given me, and my West Point acceptance letter, still carrying the faint smell of coffee. I had just opened the back door when I heard the soft squeak of a hinge behind me. Nathan stood in the hallway, still wearing his pajamas, still holding the old teddy bear Dad had given him. He didn't say anything at first. He just ran over and wrapped his arms around me. "Sarah, you're coming back, right?" I held him as tightly as I could. "I will." It was the only lie I ever told my little brother. The moment I said those words, I already knew my life would never be the same again. The Greyhound pulled out of Arlington long before sunrise. The brakes hissed as the bus eased away from the terminal. The smell of diesel drifted through the cabin, mixing with the aroma of hot coffee from a paper cup a passenger carried a few rows ahead. I took the window seat. An older man wearing a jacket with a Marine Corps patch settled into the seat beside me. His eyes landed on the West Point envelope in my lap. He smiled. "First time leaving home?" I nodded. "Yes, sir." He reached out his hand. "Marine Corps. Retired now." I shook it. For a few seconds he stared quietly out the window. Then he smiled again. I know that look. The first time I left Texas, I was riding a bus just like this. He gave my shoulder a gentle pat. "You'll be all right." That was the entire conversation. But for the rest of the trip, I no longer felt completely alone. West Point wasn't anything like the recruiting commercials I'd grown up watching. On the first morning of Beast Barracks, the whistle blew long before sunrise. A drill sergeant screamed until his voice was nearly gone. Because my boots weren't polished well enough. We ran, we crawled, we climbed. Then we ran some more. By late afternoon, the female cadet beside me suddenly collapsed. She pulled off her cover, threw it onto the ground. "I quit." Her voice shook. "I can't do this anymore." The drill sergeant walked over. He didn't yell. He simply pointed at the rucksack lying at her feet. "If you want to go home, pick it up." She broke down crying. No one was allowed to help. No one was allowed to speak. I quietly bent down, picked up her cover, placed it back in her hands and whispered, "Get up." Just 2 words. She looked at me for a long moment, then took a deep breath, put her cover back on, and we started running again. Years later, I can't remember her name, but I still remember the look in her eyes. Because that day, it wasn't just her who made it through. It was me too. A few weeks later, the blisters on my feet had turned into calluses. The shouting no longer made me flinch. The hardest part wasn't the training. It was the holidays. Our first Thanksgiving. Our first Thanksgiving at West Point. The barracks were almost empty. I bought a cup of coffee and a chicken sandwich from a vending machine. Then I sat alone on a bench, watching families arrive to pick up their sons and daughters. One father wrapped his son in a bear hug. A mother held her daughter so tightly they both started crying. I simply watched, then took another sip of my coffee. It had already gone cold. By Christmas, I received exactly 1 package. The return address read, Doc Harmon. Inside, there was a pair of knitted gloves, a tin of homemade butter cookies, and a small handwritten card. "Your father would be proud of you." I opened the cookie tin. The smell of butter filled the room. For the first time since leaving home, I cried. Nathan still texted me every now and then. "You okay? Is it really that cold up there?" The messages were always short. I always answered the same way. "I'm okay." I never told him about Beast Barracks. Never told him about the nights I missed home so badly I couldn't sleep. And he never told me what things were like back home. Years later, I found out why. My mother had simply stopped mentioning my name. Completely. 4 years passed. Graduation day finally arrived. The parade grounds were packed with families. Applause echoed across the academy. People hugged, took pictures, laughed, cried. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a small tripod. Set it beside a stone wall. Mounted my camera. Set the timer for 10 seconds. Just before I walked into the frame, I glanced to my left. A father was carefully straightening his son's graduation cap. To my right, a mother wrapped her daughter in a long embrace, tears streaming down her face. I stood there for a few seconds. Then I smiled. Walked into position. The shutter clicked, click. That was the only graduation photo I have. No family. No one standing beside me. Just me, and the uniform I'd spent nearly 4 years earning. If you're still listening, leave a period chop in the comments. Just one small dot lets me know you're still here with me. And maybe, somewhere among everyone hearing this story, there's someone who also had to leave home to chase a dream no one else believed in. Back then, I thought West Point would be the hardest challenge I'd ever face. I was wrong. Because immediately after graduation, a man in a black suit was waiting for me outside the academy gates. He said only one sentence: "You're required to report immediately." And from that moment on, my life entered a chapter where I couldn't even tell the people I loved what my job actually was. The man in the black suit waiting outside the gates of West Point never offered his hand. He simply handed me a gray envelope. "Report at 600 tomorrow. The location is inside. Don't bring your phone. And don't tell anyone." That was the entire conversation. 24 hours later, the bus stopped outside a building with no sign, no name, nothing to identify it. The steel gate slid open after a guard checked my paperwork. I stepped through the security checkpoint. My phone, my watch, my wallet, my car keys. Everything went into a gray metal tray. A security officer handed me a plain black badge. There was no name on it, only a string of numbers. From this moment on, the only thing you need to remember is to wear this. The steel door ahead of me opened, then slammed shut behind me with a heavy thud. Another door opened, then another. Within minutes, I couldn't see daylight anymore. Only endless hallways and bright white fluorescent lights. The escort stopped walking, turned toward me. From this point forward, you'll get used to people having no idea what you actually do. I signed one agreement after another. Some pages I was allowed to read, others I was only allowed to sign. No questions, no notes. By the end of that morning, I understood something. If I wanted this career, I had to accept that the people I loved would never truly know my life. The years that followed blurred together, one assignment after another, one installation after another, one secure conference room after the next. There were weeks when I slept less than 12 hours total. Months without a single weekend off. I learned how to call a vending machine sandwich dinner, how to treat a cup of coffee at 3 a.m, like breakfast, and how to keep a small packed suitcase by the front door, because I never knew when I'd be leaving again. My apartment in Washington was neat. A gray sofa, a bookshelf, a dining table built for two. But almost no one ever sat across from me. The microwave worked harder than the stove. The refrigerator held little more than milk, eggs, and a few frozen dinners. Some nights, I'd turn on the television. The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade would be playing live. Outside my apartment window, the neighbors gathered for backyard barbecues. Children laughed as they chased each other across the grass. And there I was, still wearing my work clothes, eating microwaved noodles alone. The hardest part wasn't the sleepless nights. It wasn't the endless travel. It was all the moments I couldn't be there. Doc Harmon's 80th birthday. I'd bought him an antique pocket watch months in advance, written a card by hand, left the wrapped gift beside my front door, ready to take with me. Then that very afternoon, my phone vibrated. Change of plans. Everyone reports in 30 minutes. I looked at the gift, then at the suitcase waiting by the door. In the end, the only message I had time to send was, "I'm so sorry." 3 days later, Doc finally wrote back, "Don't apologize. Just come home safe." The pocket watch stayed in its box for almost another year before I was finally able to give it to him. Then there was Ethan. We'd come through the program together. Ethan drank his coffee black, so strong that I used to joke, if you spilled that on the floor, it'd probably eat through the tile. He'd just laugh. Every morning, when I walked into the office, 2 cups of coffee were already waiting on the desk. One for him, one for me. No one asked, no texts, it simply became our routine. Some mornings I'd arrive late. My coffee would already be cold. Ethan never threw it away. He'd just grin, knew you'd show up eventually. Then one morning, I walked in, and there was only 1 cup. Steam still curled from the coffee, but the chair across from me was empty. I stood there, staring at that chair for a long time. No one said a word. A few days later, I received a photograph from Ethan's wife. Their son was standing beside a perfectly folded American flag. The boy looked about 8 years old, the exact same age Nathan had been when our father died. I stared at that picture for a long time, then locked my phone. That day, I went right back to work. I didn't attend Ethan's funeral. I never got to hug his wife. I never got to say goodbye. But the moment I remember most from those years wasn't losing Ethan. It was the day I made a mistake. It happened during my 3rd year. I trusted a single intelligence report. Our team moved almost 20 minutes later than planned. Thankfully, no one died. But one family had to wait 20 extra minutes before they could be evacuated. 20 minutes. Long enough to stay with me for the rest of my life. From that day forward, I never made another decision based on a single source. I checked it again, then checked it again, and one more time. Not because I was afraid of being wrong, but because I understood something most people never have to. Some mistakes can't be measured in paperwork. They can only be measured in someone else's life. Some nights, I'd make it back to my apartment, close to 3 in the morning. I'd brew another cup of coffee, stand by the window, and watch the Potomac River, lying perfectly still beneath the night sky. I never imagined that a single cold chicken wing could make my younger brother stand at attention in front of our entire family on Thanksgiving night. The soft clink of a silver spoon against a porcelain plate echoed through the room. It was barely a sound, but even now, I can still hear it as clearly as if it happened yesterday. It was Thanksgiving at my mother's house in Arlington, Virginia. The long oak dining table was packed with 15 relatives. The smell of roasted turkey, rich gravy, warm apple pie, and cinnamon filled the house with the kind of comfort every family hopes to feel on Thanksgiving. Outside the windows, the last maple leaves of autumn drifted across the lawn beneath the porch light. If someone had walked past the house that night, they would have thought we were the picture of a perfect family. My mother smiled. She placed the biggest slice of turkey breast onto Nathan's plate, then another scoop of mashed potatoes, extra gravy, a warm buttered roll. She gently patted his shoulder. "Eat up. You need your strength." One of my aunts laughed. "Nathan's always been too skinny." The whole table laughed with her. Then my plate came around. My mother stopped it before it reached me. She glanced over the serving tray, then picked up the lone chicken wing sitting in the corner. The skin had gone dry. The meat clung stubbornly to the bone. She added a spoonful of cold green beans. Clink! The spoon tapped my plate. "That should be enough," she smiled. "You don't need nearly as much energy as Nathan does." My uncle shrugged. "She's right. At least Nathan actually works out in the field." One of my aunts lifted her wine glass. "The boys earned it." Laughter filled the room again. No one yelled at me. No one insulted me. Somehow, that made it hurt even more. Because in that room, not a single person thought anything unusual had just happened. I looked down at the lonely chicken wing. The truth was, I hadn't had time to sit down and finish a real meal in 3 days. I'd been living on coffee, protein bars, and half-eaten sandwiches between meetings. But nobody at that table knew that. To them, I was just the daughter with a desk job. Nathan was the family's pride. A Navy SEAL. His dress uniform was perfectly pressed. The gold buttons caught the glow of the chandelier every time he moved. Me? I was wearing the same plain gray business suit I always wore. No rank, no insignia. Nothing that hinted I served in the military, too. I preferred it that way. I picked up my knife, set my fork down, exactly where my hands had learned to place them after nearly 20 years. I didn't think about it. I wasn't trying to make a statement. It was simply muscle memory. Then I slid my chair a few inches closer to the wall, just enough. I stood outside the front door for a few more seconds. The familiar smell of roasted turkey drifted onto the porch with the cold November air. Laughter spilled out from the dining room. Everything sounded exactly the way Thanksgiving had when I was a kid. Only I wasn't the 18-year-old girl who'd walked away from this house with nothing but a backpack anymore. I took one slow breath, then opened the door. "I'm home." My mother glanced up for only a second. "About time." Then she turned back to the kitchen. No hug. No, "How was the drive?" No, "Have you eaten?" Nathan walked over. He held out his hand. "Hey, Sarah. Good to see you." We shook hands. That was it. But I noticed something immediately. His eyes had changed since the last time I'd seen him. Older, calmer. The eyes of a man who had truly become a Navy SEAL. About 15 minutes later, everyone had gathered around the long oak table. The chandelier reflected off crystal glasses. The smell of butter, fresh gravy, pumpkin pie. If someone had snapped a picture in that moment, they would have sworn we were the perfect family. I took the chair at the end of the table, the same way I always did, my back against the wall. From there, I had a clear view of the front door, the kitchen entrance, the sliding glass door to the backyard, even the reflection in the mirror behind the liquor cabinet. It all happened so naturally, I never even realized I was doing it. Nathan did. My mother began serving dinner. She placed the biggest slice of turkey breast on Nathan's plate. Mashed potatoes. Extra gravy. This one's for you. You need to keep your strength up. Then she turned toward me. She looked over the serving tray for a moment. Finally, she picked up the cold chicken wing sitting in the corner and dropped it onto my plate. The stainless steel tongs tapped the porcelain. That's enough. You sit behind a desk all day. You don't need much. My uncle chuckled. She's right. Nathan's the one doing the real work. A few people laughed. I simply nodded, picked up my knife, set down my fork, and began separating the meat from the bone. Not too fast, not too slow. Every movement was deliberate, precise, the kind of muscle memory built through thousands of repetitions. Nathan was in the middle of telling a story from his team, so then the whole unit had to. He stopped in the middle of the sentence. His fork was still in his hand, but it never made it to his mouth. His eyes locked onto my right hand. One of our cousins frowned. So, what happened next? Nathan didn't answer. He kept staring. I simply continued eating. His eyes dropped to the way I held my knife, then to where I was sitting, then briefly to the doorway behind me. The smile slowly disappeared from his face. My mother never noticed. She kept talking. She's always been like this. When she was little, all she ever did was study. Now she sits behind a desk all day. I still don't understand why she insists on wearing suits. One of my aunts laughed. She looks like she works at the DMV. Laughter rolled around the table again. Everyone laughed, except Nathan. One of my cousins started talking about last night's football game. Nathan never heard him. An aunt asked him about his latest training cycle. He didn't answer that either. His eyes kept moving, from my hand, to the knife, to my chair, to every doorway around the room. Then, my mother glanced up at my father's photograph hanging on the wall. She gave a small shrug. At least Nathan became a real soldier. Then she looked at me. And you? You're just a POG. The table fell silent. Only for a few seconds. Nathan slowly set his fork on the table. He never looked at our mother. Only at me. Sarah, why are you sitting with your back against the wall? I smiled. Just a habit. He slowly shook his head. No. That's not a habit. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. Normal people don't clear 4 exits in a matter of seconds. And normal people don't index a knife like that. My uncle laughed. You've been watching too many movies. Nathan ignored him. His eyes never left mine. What unit did you serve with? I cut another small piece of meat from the chicken wing. Can't talk about it. Nathan swallowed hard. Then, just tell me your call sign. My mother burst out laughing. Call sign? She pushes paperwork. What would she need a call sign for? This time, no one laughed with her. I looked at Nathan, then quietly laid my knife on the plate. Oracle 9, just 2 words. Nathan's chair slammed backward across the hardwood floor. Screech! At that exact moment, the wine glass in front of Nathan slipped off the edge of the table. Crash! Glass shattered across the hardwood floor. Red wine spread over the cream-colored rug. One of the younger kids jumped and burst into tears. An aunt quickly scooped the child into her arms. One of my cousins instinctively pushed back his chair and stood. Another looked back and forth between Nathan and me. No one bent down to pick up the broken glass. No one said a word. Nathan stood perfectly straight, his arms locked against the seams of his trousers. His eyes never left mine. It was the unmistakable posture of a service member standing before a superior officer. My mother frowned. Nathan, sit down. He didn't move. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Ma'am? The entire room went silent. I gave the slightest nod. At ease. Nathan slowly relaxed his shoulders, but he remained standing. My mother looked from him to me. The color drained from her face. What is going on? No one answered. If you're enjoying this story, leave a tot in the comments, and if you're not, Go ahead and hit the like button anyway. I read every single comment, and yours might just inspire the next story. Nathan's eyes stayed locked on mine. Several long seconds passed before he spoke again, quietly. Oracle 9. Sarah? Are you still active? I hadn't even opened my mouth to answer when the phone inside my jacket began to vibrate. The phone in my jacket vibrated. Once, then again. No one at the table was talking anymore. Nathan was still standing across from me, back straight, hands pressed against the seams of his trousers. Ma'am. His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence, everyone heard it. My mother frowned. Nathan, what are you doing? He didn't answer. His eyes never left mine. I slipped the phone from my pocket. The screen showed only one word. Confirm. I tapped it, raised the phone to my ear. Oracle. There was no greeting, no introduction, only a voice. Escalation authorized. Confirm status. I'm ready. 30 minutes. Copy. The call was over, less than 20 seconds. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. No explanation, no dramatic reaction. Without saying a word, I bent down and picked up the napkin that had fallen beside my chair. My mother pushed herself to her feet. The least you can do is tell me what's going on. I looked at her, gave a small nod. I have to leave. Leave? Where? Work. She let out a bitter laugh. Work. That's always your answer. She took another step toward me, started reaching for my arm. Before she could, Nathan stepped between us. He never touched either of us. He simply stood there. Mom? Don't. The entire room froze. I had never heard Nathan speak to our mother like that. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was calm. My mother stared at him. Move. Nathan slowly shook his head. Please. Don't. No one understood what was happening. Except me. Nathan wasn't protecting me from our mother. He was protecting our mother from accidentally obstructing someone who had just received an emergency deployment order. It wasn't emotion. It was instinct. The instinct of a professional operator. One of my uncles finally broke the silence. Would somebody please explain what the hell is going on? Nathan turned toward him. I can't. Then, after a brief pause, he added, and I don't think anyone in this room should ask another question. The silence settled over the house once again. My mother looked from Nathan to me. The anger was gone. All that remained was confusion. Maybe for the first time in years, she realized she had no idea who her own daughter really was. I picked up the coat hanging over the back of my chair, slipped it on, grabbed my keys. One of my young nieces tugged gently on her grandmother's sleeve. Grandma. Why is Uncle Nathan calling Aunt Sarah, ma'am? No one answered. The air conditioner kept humming. The old clock on the wall kept ticking, but the room wasn't the same anymore. I walked toward the front door. As I passed Nathan, he shifted slightly to one side, giving me room, the exact way a service member steps aside for a superior officer. I stopped for just a moment. At ease, Nathan gave a single nod. Yes, ma'am. No one laughed anymore. I opened the door. A blast of cold late November air swept inside. The damp scent of maple leaves after the rain filled the porch. I had barely stepped down the first stair when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Nathan had followed me outside. The front door closed behind him. The voices inside vanished instantly. Now it was just the two of us, standing beneath the porch light. Nathan studied me for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I'm not going to ask what you do. I nodded. Thank you. He drew in a slow breath. I just want to know one thing. All these years, have you been carrying all of this? By yourself? I looked at him. Then, I gave him the smallest smile. Nathan lowered his head. He understood. He didn't need another answer. Just then, two black SUVs with no license plates slowly turned onto the street. Their headlights swept across the front lawn before coming to a stop outside the house. A man in a dark suit stepped out. He quietly closed the door behind him, walked straight toward me, then gave a respectful nod. Welcome back, ma'am. I returned the nod. Nothing more needed to be said. The rear passenger door was already open. A security officer stood beside it, holding it for me. He didn't ask for identification. He didn't verify who I was. He simply waited for me to get in. Nathan watched every second of it. He never asked another question. I stepped down the last porch step. Then Nathan slowly raised his right hand. His salute was flawless, the kind that comes from years of discipline and genuine respect. I returned the salute. Short, precise. Then I turned and climbed into the SUV. The door closed behind me. Through the dark tinted window, I could still see Nathan. He never lowered his hand. He held that salute until the SUV pulled away, and he was still standing there, long after our convoy disappeared around the end of the street. The black SUV rolled away from the neighborhood where I'd grown up. Through the tinted window, I could still see Nathan, standing at the end of the driveway. His hand never left his brow. He held that salute until we disappeared from sight. No one inside the vehicle spoke. The man beside me simply handed over a tablet. Only a few words appeared on the screen. Priority response. All teams waiting. I handed it back. I didn't ask a single question. About 20 minutes later, we pulled through the entrance of a building with no sign out front. The first steel gate opened. Then the second. I scanned my badge, pressed my palm against the biometric reader. A security officer snapped to attention. "Good evening, ma'am." I moved quickly down the long hallway beneath harsh white lights. The command center doors swung open. Every conversation inside stopped. More than 20 people stood around a massive operations screen. A 4-star general turned toward me. He looked me in the eyes, then said only one sentence. "We've been waiting." No introductions, no explanations. The room instinctively parted, making a path straight to the display. I stepped forward. The digital map filled the screen. One extraction team was still trapped, along with a family of 3 civilians. A young officer spoke first. "The fastest option leaves them behind." I glanced at the mission clock, then back at the map. "There's another route. It'll take longer. I know." I picked up the digital stylus, drew a new line across the terrain, changed the route. No one argued. The order went out immediately. The room fell silent. Only radios, keyboards, and the steady countdown clock. A young intelligence analyst gripped her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. The lieutenant kept staring at the screen, waiting. Minutes passed. Then a transmission broke through. "We've reached them. All 3 civilians are secure." Another pause. Then, "All personnel have cleared the area." No one applauded. No one celebrated. The 4-star general looked at me, gave one quiet nod. "Right call." Just 2 words. Then everyone returned to work. The meeting was over. I left the command center just before sunrise. My personal phone was returned to me at the security desk. 3 missed calls, every one of them from Nathan. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then quietly slipped the phone back into my pocket. Back in Arlington, no one wanted to finish Thanksgiving dinner. The chicken wing on my plate was still there, stone cold. My mother remained in her chair. For a very long time, she didn't say a word. She simply stared at the empty seat where I'd been sitting. Her eyes settled on the neatly folded napkin beside my plate. Then slowly, she reached over, picked up the cold chicken wing, and placed it back onto the serving platter. After that, she grabbed a dish towel, quietly wiped away the red wine still staining the table. One of my aunts looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. One of the younger children rested their head against their mother's shoulder. The house had become so quiet. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Nathan was still standing by the window, looking out at the street where the black SUVs had disappeared. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "I can't tell you. And Mom, please don't ask. Some answers are safer if you never know them." My mother never turned around. She simply picked up my napkin, folded it one more time, and placed it neatly beside my untouched plate. By the time the car dropped me back at my apartment in Washington, the sun was just beginning to rise. I set my keys on the kitchen counter, made myself another cup of coffee, then stood by the window, watching the first light shimmer across the Potomac. My phone vibrated. This time, it wasn't work. It was a text from Nathan, just one sentence. "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here to listen." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I smiled. For the first time in many years, I realized I didn't have to carry everything by myself anymore. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, my phone rang on a quiet Sunday morning. Nathan's name lit up the screen. I looked at it for a few seconds before answering. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, he spoke. "Sarah, I'm in Georgetown. If you're free, would you grab a coffee with me?" I smiled. "I'd like that." 40 minutes later, I walked into a small coffee shop on a street corner. The smell of freshly roasted beans filled the room. Behind the counter, the steady hum of the espresso grinder blended into the quiet conversation around us. Nathan was already there. The moment he saw me, he stood, then quietly pulled out a chair for me. It was such a small gesture, but he'd never done that before. We both ordered Americanos. For the first few minutes, neither of us said anything. Nathan slowly stirred his coffee, watching the steam curl into the air. Finally he spoke. "That night, I called you 3 times. But I hung up every time." I smiled. "I was working." He nodded. I figured. A moment passed, then he looked up. "I'm sorry, I didn't ask what he was apologizing for." Nathan stared out the front window. "For almost 30 years, I never once asked if you were okay." I stayed quiet. Outside, a father knelt to brush cookie crumbs off his little daughter's jacket. Nathan watched them, then said softly, "I spent my whole life believing Mom was right. And that night, I realized I'd only ever heard half the story." I gently changed the subject. "How about this weekend? We go see Doc Harmon." A real smile spread across his face. "I'd love that." Saturday morning, we drove together to Doc Harmon's little cabin in Virginia. The old rocking chair on the porch creaked gently with the breeze. The air smelled of pine, fresh coffee, and barbecue drifting from the grill behind the house. Doc Harmon was turning burgers over the fire when he heard our truck pull in. He turned around, saw the two of us standing there, and broke into a smile. It was the same warm smile I'd seen the first time we met after my father's funeral. Nathan reached him first. He wrapped Doc in a tight hug. "Finally, I get to meet you properly." Doc gave Nathan's shoulder a gentle pat. "Your father would have loved seeing this." That afternoon, we ate lunch out on the porch. Grilled corn, potato salad, barbecue, a pitcher of sweet iced tea. No one mentioned Oracle 9. No one mentioned the Pentagon. No one brought up Thanksgiving night. After we finished eating, Doc carried out an old toolbox. Nathan picked it up without being asked. The two of them spent the afternoon replacing the weathered section of fence behind the house. The steady rhythm of hammers echoed through the yard. Every now and then, one of them laughed. I stood in the kitchen making another pot of coffee, looking out through the window. For years, I'd never allowed myself to imagine a moment like this. The two most important men left in my life, working side by side. As evening settled in, Doc disappeared into the house. When he came back, he was carrying a small wooden box. He placed it gently in front of me. "Your father asked me to hold on to this for the last time." I slowly lifted the lid. There were no medals, no certificates, just my father's old military watch. Nathan picked it up carefully. He wiped a thin layer of dust from the crystal with his thumb, then handed it to me. "You should keep it." I slipped the watch onto my wrist. The leather strap was worn smooth with age, but it still fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me all these years. Back in Arlington, the house had grown quiet. My mother walked past the small cabinet in the hallway, then stopped. She slowly opened the door. Inside, my father's folded flag was still there, tucked behind the old winter coats, exactly where it had been for years. She stood there, without moving. Then, for the first time in a very long time, she reached inside and gently lifted the flag into her hands. She gently brushed away the thin layer of dust, then carried the folded flag into the living room. She placed it on the highest shelf, directly beneath my father's photograph. She stepped back and simply stood there, looking at it. No one else was in the house. No one saw. Then she turned and quietly switched off the lights. Back in Virginia, Nathan hammered the last board into the fence. He brushed the sawdust from his hands, then looked over at me. "Sarah, how about next weekend? We grab coffee again?" I smiled. "I'd like that." I picked up 3 mugs of coffee and walked out onto the porch. One for Nathan, one for Doc Harmon. The last one stayed in my hands. Doc settled into the old rocking chair. He took a slow sip. Nathan sat down on the front steps. None of us said another word. We simply watched the sun slowly disappear behind the trees. If you'd like to hear more about Sarah's journey, about Nathan, about Doc Harmon, and everything that happened after that Thanksgiving, leave a 2 in the comments below. I'd love to continue their story in a future video. Nathan lifted his coffee mug, lightly tapped it against mine. He didn't say a word. Doc Harmon looked at both of us and smiled. The old rocking chair creaked softly. Nathan's quiet laugh drifted into the cool evening breeze. And that's the last thing I remember about that day.